Hey, what's going on guys? B-Flatten here with a brand new Elden Ring video. Today I'm going to be going over some beginner tips and tricks that you could play while playing a Souls-like game or Elden Ring. Now, I've had a bunch of people ask me and tell me that they are on the Elden Ring hype train and that this is their first Souls-like game that they have played, meaning that they have not played Dark Souls 1 to 3, Bloodborne, Sekiro, etc. So they're very new to this style of genre. So for those people who are out there, this is a little bit of an entry beginner tips and tricks on how to get better at the game. The first one is rolling. You really have to learn how to use your rolling mechanics to your advantage. Shielding is okay as like a last ditch effort if you don't know the timing of the attack, but rolling will give you something called an iframe. An iframe will be the thing that will allow you to go and roll through an attack while not taking damage. Now, as you saw there, I just did a fat roll. A fat roll is a roll in which you have too much armor weight that is attached to your character. The way to get rid of it is you have to lower down your armor weight in order to make it so that you can fast roll. There's three different types of rolls. There's fast rolling, mid rolling, and fat rolling. You just saw me do a fat roll there. I'll show you what it looks like when you do a fast roll. I just have to find my right talisman here. Equipment load. There we go. And all of a sudden, I'm now doing a fast roll. So the iframe that you get is in between the middle of the somersault and the end of the somersault. So as soon as you're in the midst of the somersault. So for example, there, there, there. I'll show you what it looks like against an enemy, but that is what it looks like when you're not fighting an enemy. The armor weight that you find is 70% of your maximum capacity. You can find that in your status. Your equipment load right now is 52.3 out of 83.9. So I was actually wrong. That was a medium load. You can go a little bit more and take off even more weight so that you can get yourself into a fast roll. Little bit of a faster roll there. You ideally want to get yourself to a point where you're always fast rolling, because the mid rolls and fat rolls will make it so that the iframe is a little bit wonky and it doesn't work as well. It's also so that you can roll basically on demand. Another thing to really keep in mind with Elden Ring is that Elden Ring will have something called Horseback Combat. So once you get your trusty steed, Torrent, you can actually do Horseback Combat. Now, if you're a Shadow of the Colossus player, you probably are already familiar with how Horseback Combat works, except Horseback Combat in this game is not bad at all. You can target lock, you can swing your sword, you can do a heavy attack, you can drink Estus so that you can heal on horseback, and you can also cast spells while you're on horseback. You're unable to use abilities of your sword while on horseback. However, you can actually wind up the Ash of War to swing as if you do. The next thing to keep in mind when you're fighting an enemy is the boss mechanics or the attacks of the enemy. Now, this is super important because we take all the things that we just talked about, the rolling, your fast rolling, things like that. We take all of that and we combine it with how an enemy's mechanics are. So it ends up being our mechanics versus the enemy's mechanics and how we apply them together. So we got to find an enemy. Once we do, we fight the enemy, and said enemy will engage us in combat, and we can actually time our rolling versus that enemy. But here's an enemy over here. So there you can see we rolled just in time, so we were unable to take damage there. There's an iframe there. I rolled into the attack, but the iframe made it so that I don't take damage. I was a little late on that timing there. You want to get really good at rolling, because rolling will make it so that you don't take damage in combat. You can block like I was mentioning earlier. However, blocking will make it so that you will lose stamina instead. Stamina is super important in combat because that's going to be the way that you're going to be rolling, the way that you're going to be attacking, shielding, that sort of thing. If your stamina breaks when your shield is up, you will be prone to a critical attack, which some enemies can actually capitalize on, allowing a critical strike against you. There's also shield stats as well that you need to pay attention to. Mine happens to have 100 physical and about mid-tier for the magic and the guard boost. There are some shields that don't. Some enemies have magic attacks, some shields don't have physical 100, which means that they will go through the shield and actually damage you even though you guard. So you gotta keep that in mind too. There are some shields with some really good abilities in the game, so keep that in mind as well. But rolling is going to be your ideal form of combat so that you don't take damage, especially when you fight bosses. Finally, one of the biggest tips that I can give for beginner players in Elden Ring is how Art of Wars and how sword mechanics actually work. So there's bars in this game that will stack up, and if the bar stacks up all the way, that effect will take over. There's things like Scarlet Rot, there's Bleed, there's Frostbite, things like that. These are different abilities that happen. You don't get to see the bar on the enemy, however, if that bar stacks up all the way, that ability will take over. For beginner players, I would not suggest to play a mage-like character, even though you hear that they're all overpowered. It takes an experienced player to learn how to play a mage character properly, especially since it takes FP, where in previous games it didn't. You were just able to spam the spell. I would suggest going with a either high dexterous character, high strength character, lots of HP, kind of like a tanky build, but focusing either on strength or dexterity, whichever is your preference. Bleed is really, really good in this game as a starter. My Moonveil sword here does bleed. The Uji Katana does bleed. Katanas in general will have certain abilities. This Serpent Bone Blade Katana does poison buildup, so you can apply poison to enemies when it applies. How bleed works is that when the bar builds up all the way, what ends up happening is a portion of the damage that is done will go into your enemy's HP. So like you'll hit for maybe 100-200 damage a swing, and the bleed buildup after it builds up all the way will do like 1,000 plus. So it's like a free 5 swings if you can land that and get that to apply. And you can do that multiple times in a boss fight. So long as that bar keeps on building up, you can absolutely do multiple bleed effects. Finally, Art of War. There's some abilities of items that you can use in this game. For example, I'm going to be using my Moonlight Sword here. The Moonlight Sword has a special Art of War that's attached to it, but you can apply Art of Wars to different swords to give them different abilities. Mine does the Moonlight Transient, which is that. The heavy attack will make it a vertical slash. It causes FP to use the skill. However, you can apply the skill into different items and weapons. This is super good to know because you could start off a combat in a really advantage type of way. Sometimes you can one-shot, sometimes you can stun your enemies. It makes it so that fighting multiple enemies will give you quite an advantage if you know what you're doing. Make sure we use our rolling so that we don't get pegged by this archer over here, and we can just finish him off with no problems. You can use these abilities to stun enemies. You can stun bosses, which will open you up for critical hits, which will also stack bleed, which will also allow big damage early on. So long as you have FP to spend for it, it'll make it so that the combats will be a lot easier. So that there is about 5 different mechanics that you can use in Elden Ring or even transfer to Dark Souls so that you can become a little bit of a better player. These are more beginner tips. If you want to see more of a intermediate or even advanced tips, let me know. I'll be able to run over those and make it so that you guys can be a better player in Elden Ring or Dark Souls. We're going to ignore that happened in the video because you can get attacked from literally anywhere. My name is V Flatten, guys, and I'm signing on out of here. Take care, all. Laters.